Gerrard. Um, just a minute. Just a minute. Gerrard is a senior. Let me introduce Gerrard. For those who may not be familiar with him, but I am sure if we have taken the NEC course, a lot of us have known Rob. Rob is a senior NEC consultant, and he's a secretary of NEC user group Accredited Mediator, and a dispute resolution advisor. Robert specializes in NEC contract, both setting up, both responsible to set up and also successfully manage the NEC contracts. He has over 36 years experience in contract management and carries out training and consultancy around the world related to NEC, sure. Robert is based in Hong Kong and works as a senior consultant for Thomas Telford Limited. So can anyone build? Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
He's an examiner for the Institution of Civil Engineer Certificate in Law and Contract Management course, and has also held the position of NEC Users Group Secretary from 2006 to date. Rob also was an NEC 4 contract drafter and part of the NEC 3 contract working group. Rob's publication include NEC 3 and NEC 4 compare against 2017 version, NEC 2 and NEC 3 compare against 2005 version. John author in NEC 4, Avoiding and Resolving Dispute 2019, NEC 4 Practical Solution 2017, and NEC 3 Practical Solution 2015. Today, what would like to share with us a very important topic relating to NEC contract, a very fundamental one, the scope, how we can get it started. So this is the first series that he will talk with us, and we will two more coming. So I pass the time to Rob. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. Great introduction. Welcome, everybody. Welcome for sacrificing an hour of your time on a typhoon day. So very impressive. I'm on Llama Island. I said it took me 5 minutes to get connect to the internet, and I've tried to share this about 3 times and it didn't work, but fingers crossed, everything is okay. The bridge behind me and the bridge behind Letty, actually. So maybe we have a bridge from Llama one day to Lantau or to Aberdeen or something like that, but we'll see. So welcome Letty Mara as well. Welcome Letty, give us a wave, Letty. Everybody know you're here. So today's topic is the scope. So this is the first of 3 webinars, as Kenneth says. And the assumption is you, of course, know something about NEC, and many of you may be perhaps accredited. If you're not accredited, please get accredited. Please talk to Letty about that. Now, the scope. So the scope, in my opinion, is the most important deliverable from a client's perspective. So it's absolutely fundamental. And the scope basically tells the contractor what the contractor is to design, if any, what they are to build. They're always the builder, aren't they? They're always constructing. And what are the constraints acting upon them? They're the 3 most important aspects of the scope. What are they designing? What are they building? What are the constraints that are acting upon them? If you have half a scope, you have half a prize, half a program. So it is absolutely key that we listen to our clients as best that we possibly can. We positively and constructively challenge our clients. I'll come on to that a little bit later to make sure we thoroughly understand what it is, what asset they would like us to create or to maintain, and then reflect that into construction industry terminology. So you're acting as translators, aren't you? So many clients are actually what I would call lay people. They're perhaps not construction experts. So you have a lay person setting out their requirements. You have to convert that into construction industry speak as best you possibly can for tendering contractors to be able to understand what it is that they need to price for. So in these webinars, what we're going to try and do, I'm going to talk for a maximum, hopefully about 30 minutes, and leave a good 20 or so minutes for questions. And the questions can be anything to do with NEC, as well as, of course, this topic. So this topic is about writing the scope well in the first place, pre-contract at tender stage, and then how you go about changing it once you're in contracts. Okay, that's what I'm going to try and do. So why have we got this webinar? It's just a series, just collaboration really between NEC and the ACE Hong Kong. Just some collaboration, some CPD for your members. So that's what we're looking to do. Now we're muting everybody because of drain on the internet and internet problems. We're asking people to turn the cameras off if you'd be so kind, and make sure your microphones are off. If you have any questions, and please do ask questions, that makes it very interesting for me. But if I can ask you, if you could type your questions out on the chat box, that'd be fantastic. I'm not going to address any questions whilst I'm going through the presentation. I'll wait until the end if that's okay. We are recording this mainly as a future CPD for other ACE members who are not able to attend today. Perhaps I think we had over 100 or so that were going to attend, and I think maybe half of that is on the call. So a significant number didn't manage to make it today. That's why we're recording. If you would rather speak than type, that's also no problem. If you just kind enough to put your hand up, with virtual hand, and then I'll ask you to unmute. So that's me. That's all you need to know about me, isn't it? But there's some other details and some contact details there. So that's what we're going to try and do. Think about the pre-contract side of getting the scope right. Explain how you change it once you're in contract, and then just stand back from both of those and reflect what goes well or what works well, what doesn't work quite so well, and some opinions that I have on how we might improve scopes in the future. Now, at the outset, if I'm honest, I've never seen a good scope. I've never seen a good scope written by anybody. What I think we should be doing as an industry is aspiring to create brilliant scopes. So brilliant, good, poor, very poor. I haven't even seen a good scope, and I'm being quite honest there. And I also have been involved in writing scopes. I personally do not have the skills to write a good scope. I'm not blessed with the ability to write in plain English. I'm not able to write clearly, concisely, and succinctly. But I do have a good eye for telling you how bad your scope is. So I'm not sure if that's a skill or not, to be honest. But so you're amongst friends. If you also struggle to write really good scopes, then you're alongside me. But you can see how important it is. Now, if you look at, if you analyze contracts once you've finished them, I'll come back to this a bit later, I suspect you will find that 90% of conversation events are related to clause 14.3, which is the clause that we use to change the scope. So the vast majority of conversation events, in my experience, are related to change in the scope. And that could have been either because the scope was written poorly in the first place, or once we're in contract, we have a need, maybe through clients' requirements, to change the scope frequently once we're in contract. Now you can do your own thoughts and considerations on that, but if that many conversation events occur because of changing the scope, do we spend enough time on the scope in the first place and understanding the client's brief? Because that, to me, is just too much emphasis on changing the scope. There was a study done some years ago now by on behalf of the government of Canada, and they found that if you add in change once a contract is awarded, change costs you 3 times as much post-contract as it would have done pre-contract. That is significant. That is very significant indeed, in my opinion. I can't validate that. I actually need to find that report at some point in time, but that's a significant financial burden on a client, isn't it? Which means we have to get the scope right in the first place and stop changing it once we're in contract. That would in turn reduce the amount of conversation events. That would free up our time to manage contracts rather than spend all our time arguing about conversation events. So I have to have a basis for today's discussion. We have scopes for the term service contract, for the professional service contract, and all other contracts. But today's presentation is on the NEC 4 engineering and construction contract, the unamended version, June 2017, with amendments October 2020. Now, if you have a June 2017 original version of this, and you wish to see what the 2020 amendments are, you can download those free from the website. Where is the website? Well, you just have to go here. Let me just type it out. Okay, go onto that website there, and you can download actually the 2019 amendments. There are a few of those, and some 2020 amendments, just a few more. They're not that significant. The amendments aren't that significant. But anyway, the basis of today's talk is the ECC. So I'll either call it NEC or ECC, but I mean this particular form of NEC contract. So first thing for you to do is just type in the chat box so I know. I get the feeling you're all going to be consultants, but you never know. You never know. So type in number 1, 2, 3, or 4 in your chat box to tell me which organization you work for. Do you work for a client? Do you work for a contractor? I dare say you don't. Do you work for a consultant? Do you work for a lawyer? I'm expecting to see number 3 from just about everybody, but you never know. Type that in now for the next 10 seconds if you'd be so kind. Okay, reluctance from most of you to type it in, never mind. Thank you, Simon Raymond. Okay, we're going to be all 3s, aren't we? Okay, enough. You've convinced me. You've convinced me that you all work for consultants, which is no surprise as this is an ACE webinar. Okay, so this thing called the scope, those of you perhaps that worked on NEC 3 engineering and construction contracts, the equivalent of the scope is called the works information. So we have the works information in the ECC, the service information, the TSC, the scope in the PSC. So one of the things they did in NEC 4 contracts was to rationalize and standardize some of the terminology. So works information became the scope. So the scope is basically the client's requirements. Think of it as being what the client wants. Maybe in the future, maybe next year we'll do some more webinars. Maybe we'll do the program. The program in turn is how the contractor intends to provide what the client wants in the scope. So the scope is what the client wants, So what is it? It is information which specifies and describes the works. The works being what it is you want the contractor to design and or build, but also it also should state constraints on how the contractor provides the works. By the way, after this, I'll send the PDF of these slides into Kenneth and Bernice, who will circulate these slides along with the video after the event. So that tells us what the scope is. Think of the scope as being what the client wants. Now, the scary clause, I think the scariest clause in the contract from actually both the client and the contractor's perspective is clause 20.1. And it simply says, and it's 10 words here, the contractor provides the works in accordance with the scope. So that's it. That's what they're going to do. That's what they promise to do, is to give you everything you've asked for in the scope. Okay. Now, if they misunderstand the scope, that's the contractor's problem. If they underprice it, underprogram, that's their problem. If they do not have the skills to provide the scope, then they have to find those skills. That is their problem. Now, just because it's their problem will also manifest itself into being a client's problem as well in turn. But again, we'll look at that perhaps more when we do the early warning session in the next webinar about the implications of contractors' risk. So the contractor is deemed to be fully aware of exactly what they're being asked to do in the scope. But therefore, turning around from a client's perspective is that they're only going to provide you what's in the scope. If you forget to put something in the scope, the contractor will not provide it unless you add it in via an instruction, which will cause a compensation event to occur, which will probably change the time and or cost aspects of the contract. So you are as good as your scope. If you have half a scope, you get half a price, half a program. Yeah, you're as good as your scope. So what we need to do as professionals, in my opinion, is raise the standard of the quality of the tender documents that we produce, such that when it goes out, I mean, I do see, in the past, consultants with their QA systems have one sheet on top of a tender document that says prepared by, reviewed by, approved by, or something like that. I would get rid of that. I'm not a believer in that approach. The approach I would take, I'd have a piece of paper with a sentence that says, I am professionally proud of this tender document. If you're not professionally proud, you shouldn't be going to tender. So we need we need to have far more pride in the deliverable that is the tender document, and the vast majority of that deliverable is the scope reflecting what the client wants. So it is of fundamental importance. Now, we tell you what the scope is and tell you how to use it, tell you all these things and how to change it, but NEC does not give you a scope. We give you a blank piece of paper. But why? Because every job is different, isn't it? Every client is different. Every job is different. Every client has different standards of specification. Every job is unique because every job's ground conditions are unique. They're all different levels or different types of ground. So it is just about impossible. Even if you're building like a McDonald's store. So McDonald's stores all look the same, don't they? Except they're all different because they've all got different constraints in how they install. They've all got different levels of ground which they're added into. They've all got different requirements for foundations, etc. So they're all unique. Now, the structure itself might be very similar, but foundations, location will be different. So we don't give you a scope. However, those of you that have done the accreditation course, you will have got the ECC and both volumes 2 and 4 of the user guides. Now, volume 2 is an extremely useful user guide in connection with the scope. Volume 2 is called Preparing an Engineering and Construction Contract, as shown on the screen here. Now, in that document to the left-hand side, we offer up to you a template, some ideas as to how to write the scope. Like a structure, basically. We also give before that some do's and don'ts. You know, don't write it certain ways, do write it others. I'll come on to those shortly. But we give you a suggested structure. It's not mandatory. It's completely up to you whether you wish to adopt it or not. But we give you a starting point. On the right-hand diagram on this slide, we go into that bit more detail. So when it comes to things like constraints, we give you prompt lists for constraints such as noise, vibration, access, working hours, and other such constraints. So we try to help you to think about the sorts of things that you need to write into the scope. Things like contractor's design. Well, what's the design life? How do you want the design to be submitted? Hard copy or soft copy? You know, what scale do you want the deliverables to be? How much of the design do you want to actually see and therefore accept? You actually strictly don't have to see and therefore accept any of the contractor's design, even in a design and build contract. So I think we give you a really good starting point to develop the scope, but you have to use your technical skills to be led by this structure and these prompts to convert a client's brief or a client's requirements into an industry acceptable terminology. So a few do's and don'ts. So be clear in what you're writing. Be concise. Be precise. Be clear. Don't repeat things. The number of times that I see similar but different statements trying to say the same thing, well, they're inconsistent. If you say the same thing twice but slightly differently, that's an inconsistency. And inconsistencies are resolved against the person who created the inconsistency. So strive to be concise, strive to be precise, write the things as clear as you can. Use plain English if you possibly can. Now, I get that English, you know, most of you will not be your first language, of course, and I don't have that skill either, but I'm not saying there's no excuse here. There is an excuse. So time and money and all the rest of it, but you know, you can possibly get some training on how to write in plain English. Learn to write things succinctly, clearly, precisely, concisely. Please try and avoid terms like opinion and satisfaction. These are dreadful terms. If you write something in the scope that says to the contractor, you know, the contractor needs to, you know, design and build something such that in the reasonable opinion of the project manager, it is satisfactory for the client. You know, what on earth does that mean? Totally subjective. Try and avoid those words if at all possible. So try and be objective, not subjective. When you write things out, perhaps give to a colleague and ask them to put a contractor's hat on and say, do you understand what it is that I'm asking you to do? So ultimately, with the deliverable that you've written as a scope, be professional. Be honest with yourself. Is it as clear as I need it to be? Is it as complete as I need it to be? Am I professionally happy with it? Remember, you are obliged to be ethical. The ACE has, quite right, will demand that you act ethically at all times. Ethically means acting honestly with integrity and doing your professional best at all times. So please be honest with yourself. And if you need help, ask for help. Somebody somewhere in your organization, I guarantee, is really good at writing scopes. Personally, I don't think those people should write the scopes. They should be mentoring other people and helping them learn that skill. Now, the last thing on sort of do's and don'ts, be careful. It's a bit of lazy drafting this, but be very careful pointing to a standard document, like a standard sort of technical specification. Because apart from it may not use NEC style speak, it may also point to other documents, and those other documents might point to other documents in turn. Before you know it, you could have hundreds of documents that are implied as part of your scope, which could be bad news. Now, there's one, I remember, it may have changed now, SESWI from memory, civil engineering water specification or something like that. I recall that once. It used to almost double up as a conditions of contract. So in a specification, it used to talk about completion, you should talk about insurance, you should talk about all things like that. Well, that in my opinion, that is not the place of a specification or a scope. They're dealt with in the conditions of contract. So be very careful pointing to standard documents. You may need to take the bits out that you need and rewrite it in language that's appropriate, or point to parts of a technical specification rather than all of it. So it's just a warning. Be careful pointing to documents that in turn point to perhaps other documents. Okay, so once we're in contract, and ideally, if there's any errors and inconsistencies and ambiguities, my plea to contractors, please point them out at tender stage. Don't gamble with pricing on what you trying to seek some sort of benefit. That's mischief, isn't it? We're better than that. Don't do that. Point out the problems to the drafters at tender stage. Let's try and have a level playing field. If you are in competitive tender, let's have a level playing field with a really good, clear scope. Let's not play games. Once we're in contract, then how do we change the scope? Well, the only person who's entitled to change the scope is somebody called the project manager, the one in italics, the one named in contract data part 1. Now, how do they change the scope? Well, they give an instruction. The main clause for changing the scope, the one that you'll see is quite prolific, is clause 14.3. It says they may give an instruction. So you have a right. You have a right to change the scope. How might you change it? You might make it slightly bigger. You might make the scope slightly smaller. You might make the scope slightly different. You have the right to change it. But general law will constrain the extent of changing the scope. For example, you are not allowed to delete 90% of the scope and give it to a cheaper contractor. That will not be permitted in law. Similarly, you are not allowed to tender for the contractor, let's say, to build a petrol station. Okay, so that's the contract, and then on day one you write an instruction to say, can you build me a very large supermarket near the petrol station? So the change must be in keeping with the original contract that was entered into. So remember that. But also remember that when you're instigating the change, the instruction itself, you have to abide by the communication rules, and those communication rules are reflected in clause 13. Clause 13.1 tells you to put a communication in a form that can be read, copied, and recorded. What I've shown on the right-hand side of this slide is just a very simple template of an instruction. In User Guide Volume 4 for the ECC, there's a number of examples of really, really simple communication forms. All we're looking for in the instruction is how the scope is changed. In the instruction itself, you do not have to say that it's a compensation event. That's a separate thing. You do not have to get it priced at this point. You just have to convey to the contractor exactly what the change of the scope is. Now, when you're writing instructions, think about all those do's and don'ts we've just been through. You've got to be just as clear with your instruction in changing the scope as you were in writing the scope in the first place. Now, each instruction will inevitably lead to a compensation event occurring, which may or may not affect time and or money. That is unless the instruction is needed because by chance you happen to have scope prepared by the client and scope prepared by the contractor. And if the contractor's scope is less than the client's, we have to drag them up by an instruction, which would not be a compensation event. But that's a little bit too detailed for this particular webinar. And personally, I have no experience of dealing with the contractor's scope. Now, if there is, though, also if there's contractor's scope, let's say it is at a level with the client scope, now they can change their scope at their request, but again, it would not be a compensation event if that occurred. But those last two paragraphs, you will probably experience that in 1% of all the contracts you'll ever work on. 99% of the contracts is really the first paragraph. The only person who'll change the scope is the project manager via a clause 14.3 instruction. Now, a few other ways in which the scope may actually change. First of all, under clause 16, the contractor may submit a value engineering proposal, basically a proposal to change the client's scope to eliminate some unnecessary costs. Value engineering are about eliminating wasteful costs. So they put forward a proposal. Why? You know, do you really need a type 2 unit? We've had a look at it and we think a type 1 unit will do just as good a job. And if you accept that and you do a deal with the saving that arises, then the scope is changed. Okay, now again, the only person who changes the scope is the project manager, but this time it's as a result of a clause 16 value engineering proposal. Also, if there is a defect, what is a defect? A defect is something that the contractor does which is not in accordance with the scope. So something doesn't meet the scope in terms of line, level, location, color, tolerance, threshold. If there is a defect, then accepting that defect, if you can do a deal to accept the defect and reduce the prices and or the completion date, you also need to change the scope to reflect the actual defective works provided by the contractor, because you've done a deal to inherit those defective works. Fairly similar is clause 46, where the contractor does not correct a defect and we retain monies from the contractor because of that. Again, the scope needs to be changed to reflect the uncorrected defect, because you're taking money off the contractor for the fact that there is an uncorrected defect. And finally, if the contractor comes up with an idea to change the client scope that will lead to a whole life benefit, again, the scope has to be changed to reflect that whole life proposal. So effectively, I've looked at 7 different ways in which the scope may actually change. It isn't just as a result of a clause 14.3 instruction. So 3 reasonably quick slides and then on to questions. Bear with me, I'll quench my thirst. So what works well in setting up the scope and changing the scope post-contract? What works well? Well, standing back, whilst I told you earlier, I've personally never seen a good scope, which is quite worrying, isn't it? But despite that, which is just my opinion, despite that, we do actually manage to build things, don't we? So that bridge in my screenshot, okay, it's in San Francisco. What an incredible structure that is. But look all around you in Hong Kong, which has withstood a T8 typhoon last night and today, and haven't heard of any damage, and hopefully there is no structural damage or personal injury. But you know, it's some pretty good design and some pretty good build to withstand all of that pressure that we've just had for the last 24 hours. So we do build things, don't we? We do build some pretty good things. We get it done. I would just say, my opinion is, it's a painful experience to get things built, and there must be a better and easier and more enjoyable way of getting things built than we do currently. But you know, we do things, don't we? We do things. Other industries, particularly research industries, don't do things. Things fail. So between us, we've all developed standard approaches. We've all got standard instructions to tendering. We've all got standard forms of agreement and forms of agreement. We've got all sorts of standardized approaches. And therefore, the tendering contractors, if you're using a competitive method, they know what's coming. They have expectations of the tender document that's coming their way. So standardization, I think, works well for certain things. And because of those things, I think we have some fairness. We have fairness in tendering. We have a level playing field as best we possibly can. So that's good. And because of all of that, the contracting industry generally is able to submit fairly competitive tenders. So I don't want to criticize this too much, because we obviously do submit lots of tender documents, and we get lots of tenders returned from contractors, and we award contracts, and we build contracts, and we maintain assets. So we do all those things. What I would say is that we can do it that bit better. That's my criticism. So what doesn't work quite so well, looking at all of that? So as I say, I've never seen a brilliant scope. I probably never will see one. I'd like to see every scope being elevated to good or really good level. Many scopes that I see are unclear. They have lots of ambiguities and inconsistencies. As I say, one day, look back at the reasons that you have for changing the scope. And if you change them because of ambiguities and inconsistencies, you must learn from that and try to not produce such problematic scopes in the future. Now, what I do find is that we rush the tender period. Why? I don't know, but many clients I've worked with say, we pick a date, we'll go to tender this Friday, this coming Friday. I'm sure some of you on this call will be going to tender this Friday. Now, what I found is 9 times out of 10, you will go to tender on Friday, even if the tender document is not complete. And what you will do, first thing Monday, is come back into the office and start writing addendums. Well, that's madness, isn't it? That's absolute madness. And you should, want to think about the consequences. If you've got 5 or 6 bidders and they've each sending these documents out to 20, 30, 50, 100 suppliers each through their supply chain, that every change you make has to get filtered throughout the entire supply chain, which is a disaster. If you are able to take just a few more days, I'm really sorry on the Friday, but we're just not ready to go to tender, then delay it a day or two. I would rather have that awkward conversation with the client that I'm not happy with the quality of the tender document, and we need to just work on it for a few more days, than send the document out and then send a load of addendums out to the contractor. The worst number of addendum I've ever worked on, I'm sure some of you can beat this by miles, is 15. I think it was 15 changes to a 4-week tender period tender document. Well, it's disastrous. And probably the contractor who wins it with the lowest price is the one who misses out addendum 7. So, rush tender document, multiple addendums is not good. I personally think it's completely unprofessional. I'm not saying it's negligent, because I would suggest that's how most of us work, but I'd say it's totally unprofessional to do that. I think we're better than that. And I think you have a duty to stand up to your clients and say, I'm really sorry, but we cannot let this out unless it goes under concession, because we're not happy with it. We're not happy with the document as it is at the moment. Okay, I've mentioned the last bullet a number of times. So how do we improve? So I'm a big fan of negotiation. Personally, I'm a big fan of ECI, early contractor involvement. I'm a big fan of getting the contractor to help us write the scope. So I would love to write scopes with the contractor, and I have done that. That way, we should avoid all ambiguity or inconsistency. And as we're writing it, we can start pricing it, programming it, and challenging the scope. Where we need to be, surely, is a scope that is crystal clear, able to be delivered safely, efficiently, and productively. So I think things like ACEHK can help us develop really good scopes. Now, I think you need to challenge and understand the scope. I think a contractor needs to challenge the scope and understand it. Don't guess what you think somebody's saying. Challenge them. If the scope is unclear, challenge. Constructively challenge. What we need to do, those people writing tender documents, is to listen very carefully to clients, also challenge clients constructively. Make sure you fully understand what they want and they understand the implications of what they're saying. Challenge that constructively. Of course, challenge it ethically. I keep using the word ethics, don't I? But ethics to me is very important. Most of us, particularly for AC, it's all you have. I don't see what else you have apart from your ethical approach. You do not make widgets. You are not factory owners. You just have outstanding professional technical ability. Now, you need to convey that technical ability in an ethical way. Now, there's different strands to ethics, but the most important 3 from my perspective is honesty, acting with integrity, and doing your professional best at all times. Do not compromise any of those. So always act honestly, always act with integrity, and do your professional best at all times. So look in the mirror at the end of this webinar, have a look in the mirror and say, can I write things clearly and simply? I personally can't do that. So I'm admitting to you, I am unable to write clearly and simply. But I don't write tender documents anymore. I don't write scopes. But if you are writing scopes, then maybe look at doing a plain English training course. Learn how to write better than we currently do. As I say, don't go to tender until you're professionally happy with the scope and the rest of the tender documents. Now, most clients crave certainty. The certainty they want in particular is time and cost. I want to know when I'll get my asset and how much it will cost. Now, a lot of people think that cost certainty means using option A lump sum. It doesn't. You won't get cost certainty by using option A if your scope is rubbish. If you have a rubbish scope, you get a poor lump sum. The way to get certainty is to have a brilliant scope. You have a brilliant scope, you will have a far better chance of having time and cost certainty. So scope, if I'm, I've said it a number of times, it's the key deliverable from a client's perspective to the tendering contractors. So that's me. That leaves just over 15 minutes for questions, and then I've got a couple more slides and I'll let Kenneth wrap up. So any questions you've got on today's topic or any other questions related to NEC from anybody? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Anybody done a plain English writing course? If so, say yes and tell us if there is any benefits. Any questions you've got? It can't be that easy a subject area. Here we go, James. Do we have any case that can illustrate how worse the scope change could result in? That's a great question. That's a great question. What's the worst change? Oh, I think my worst experience was there was a highway where we were told there was a gas main, and apparently the highway we were going to build a bridge. It was an elevated road, and there was a bridge, and we were told that the gas main was out of depth to worry the designers. We didn't need to worry about the gas main, and therefore we didn't need to divert it. We didn't need to protect it. And guess what? When we actually located it, it was very difficult to locate. I think there was some reason why we couldn't actually determine where it was. Maybe something had to be demolished. I can't remember exactly, but the gas main was in a completely different position and level to that which we thought it should be, and that was a disaster. That was an absolute disaster. So what do? It's not our gas main, it's not our property. So you speak to the gas people, say, hi, we found your main and it's not where you told us it would be. And we need some help. And what do? You either protect it or you divert it. And the gas people said, oh, we'll come along and have a look and we'll talk to you. Now, meanwhile, they've got a contractor on the site, very expensive contractor, very expensive preliminaries, waiting for a decision. And the first month went by and the gas people did nothing. And then we entered the second month and the gas people did nothing. And we entered the third month and the gas people did nothing. Despite escalating calls, pleading with people, they did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. And this was in the UK, by the way, not Hong Kong. And basically we suffered a 12-month delay because the utility was in a different place to that which it should have been, which was a complete disaster. So whether that is the scope, because the scope we should have known where it was, and we should have done diversionary works or protective works, and that should have been in the scope. So the problem caused a 1-year critical path delay and a whole lot of money to be given to the contractor for doing nothing. There's no added value, no additional works. That's my personal worst experience of a scope. I don't know, anybody else got any examples? And actually, there's one client. Here's another fact. I think it was Highways Agency in the UK. They did a study of their tender total to outturn final cost, and they found that there was a 27% difference on average between the tender total and the final account, 27%. And most of those were changes to the scope. So changes to the scope are expensive. I told you earlier that Canadian government found that changes to the scope added in post-contract cost 3 times as much as what would have cost in the original price. Question from Kitty. So I missed part at the beginning. No problem. How different is it for writing the NEC compared to other contracts like design and build? Well, with the ECC, you can have build only, or you can have design and build. Now, the scope for design and build is different to a build only. So through the ECC, you can use it for build only, or construct only, or design and build. How you write a scope is very different. If you write a scope for a build only, you basically will give the contractor drawings and a technical specification, and you will say, build this. You've done the design, or somebody from ACOM, for example, has done the design. The contractor just builds it. So writing the scope says, build the works exactly as per our drawings, using these specifications. The specifications being from materials and workmanship. When you write design and build, then that's a different skill. Now you've got to think about the performance of the asset in use. So please, design and build me an asset that has the following performance characteristics: does not use more than this amount of electricity per month, does not use more than this amount of water or chemicals a month, has the following ground floor area, has the following lighting performances. So often with the design and build, you focus on the performance of the asset in use, and therefore you have to learn how to write a scope that focuses on performances. But very different skill altogether, very different skill. Difficult, again, I haven't got the skill to do that, but in design and build, you're looking at outcomes, performances, how the contractor needs to design the works. So I think, is that an answer to the question? I think so. Let me have a look.
One more.
Yeah. Can it? Oh, one more. Yeah. From Simon.
Yeah, from Simon, yes.
So please elaborate more on the application of X21 whole life cost proposal. Any good practical examples to share? Sadly, no. So sadly, I actually wrote X21 in the ECC. I've been pushing for this for quite some years. Now, why have I pushed for it? So I pushed for it because I care passionately about tomorrow. I care passionately that how we write scopes today should really be concerned with tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean using less natural resources, being more sustainable, using less electricity and gas, being zero carbon. So, I think we have to write scopes today that are reflective of society's needs tomorrow. That's quite different. We have private clients, but for a public clients, then the government here should be absolutely all over good environmental outcomes and good low carbon solutions in our designs. Now, if you don't quite achieve that in your scope, and if the contractor comes up with a really good idea that says, I know you've picked I can't think, a type 1, okay, so if you see my air conditioner, in your scope, you ask for a type 1 air conditioner, but if you use a type 3 air conditioner, though it will cost you an extra $10,000 in capital cost, it will pay back itself over 2 years, and therefore it's a sound investment. Providing you're a client who will use that asset for more than 2 years, then it's a sound investment. It's a bit like double glazing. Certainly in the UK, it might be different in other parts of the world, but I was told once that double glazing only pays for itself if you live in the house that you have it installed for 20 years. And I'm told that solar panels on a roof, it takes 10 years to pay for themselves. So if you're a private owner of an asset, the extra investment in more capital costs takes time to pay back, doesn't it? So X21 allows the contractor to come up with a really great idea to change the client's scope that will cost more capital costs, but will save more operational costs over time. Now, in this, what I'm finding at the moment is technology. The advancements in technology is incredible. And you might write a really good scope now for a job that's going to take 2 or 3 years to build. During the build of that job for 2 or 3 years, something new might emerge, which was not known of today. And therefore that X21 it allows the contractor to come up with changes to the scope that will have a, hopefully a dramatic but beneficial whole life benefit to the client. So have I got any good examples? Not really. And so it's a fairly new clause, not very often used. Now, in Hong Kong, I don't want to criticize the government too much, but they have a cost-saving design clause, which frankly, if you read it, it doesn't really incentivize the contractor to come up with a cost-saving design, because they inherit the design and have to pick it up and finish it off and have to prove to incredible depths that their alternative idea is a good one. So to me, it dissuades the contractor from putting forward good ideas. So I'm a big fan of X21. Why? Because I've suggested it and drafted it, but I'm definitely a fan of worrying about tomorrow. That's what I do. Right, so a follow-on point from Simon, you would concur with my suggestion, not commonly used. Well, we should promote it in the future. We definitely should promote it. But you can promote it as long as you've got X21 in your, in fact, if you haven't got X21, you have a clause 12.3. So you can instigate these things. If it's whether it's design and build or whether it's build only, ask the question of the contractor, do you have any great ideas? You've reviewed the scope, you've priced the scope, you've programmed the scope. When you were doing that, did you notice anything in the scope that could be changed to have significant whole life benefits to society? I think we all want you to do that. We want you as the ECC project manager to stimulate and challenge the contractor to come up with some good ideas, but come up with them yourselves as well. Ever be looking at the scope to improve it. Why? Because the public sector is used, all of us work hard, we all pay taxes, and out of our taxes paid to the government comes money that comes back into Hong Kong society. So we want our hard-earned taxpayers' dollars to be spent as wisely as possible. And that might mean spending more today to save money tomorrow. So I'm a big fan of X21. Now, if you worry about X21 because you personally are not very good at whole life appraisals, learn how to do a whole life appraisal. Not that difficult. I'm sure through Google searches, there'll be somebody somewhere that has got an hour's free module on how to do a whole life appraisal. Encourage it. Let's think about our children's children. Let's set up an amazing society, not for us today, right now. In fact, we might need to do a little bit of sacrifice to benefit future societies. My opinion, our thinking should be our children's futures, using less natural resources, creating amazing assets that are zero carbon and low cost in use. Another question from Andrew. Any practical examples of adopting X22? Not really in Hong Kong at the moment. So I've used it prolifically in the UK and in Australia, prolific use of X22, and I think works fantastically well. My opinion is you guys are great designers, but you don't know everything. So apologies for that, but you don't know everything. The contractor does not know everything, but you've got complementary skills. If you put the skills of a designer with the skills of a builder, then that's pretty impressive. We can do some fantastic things together. So I'm a big fan of X22, big fan of ECI, big fan of negotiation. What you guys have got to do, if you don't know it already, is learn how to do professional negotiation. We've got to be, on behalf of clients, on behalf of Society of Hong Kong, learn how to professionally negotiate and create some fantastic contracts with the contractor. I only see good things come out of X22 in my experience, but in Hong Kong, X22 is being trialed at the airport and at by MTR. However, I'm not the biggest fan of those. They've got 2 ECI contractors for one of those clients and 3 ECI contractors for another. Personally, I would only ever have 1 ECI contractor, but it's an opinion. It's just an opinion, just an opinion. The benefit of adopting that than just D&B. Well, just D&B means that you've got to get the scope absolutely right, and you don't get the benefit of challenging. You should challenge the contractor on their price and their program. They should challenge you on your scope. You need your scope to be buildable, to be priceable, to be programmable. We need ultimately, what do we need as an industry? We need really sensible prices. We need to bring the cost of construction down. We need to dramatically improve our safety record. We need to reduce the time on site. We need to use more off-site manufacturing. We need to have happier and healthier people. We need to work less hours. We need less stressful people. I can write those 10 things down. That's what we need. We need an industry that has all those 10 or more improvements. I think we'll only get there through ECI. I just don't believe that one person acting on behalf of a client will achieve all of those goals. It's a collective things. Hong Kong government rightly pushing collaboration. Collaboration, that's what we need to do, isn't it? Collect up the skills that we have at our disposal, and exploit those skills for the communities of Hong Kong. So design and build has its place, build only has its place, early contractor involvement has its place. Not every job should be, ECI, not every job should be build only, not every job should be design and build. You need also developers the skill of advising clients which is the best route to take. And ECI will become more popular. I've absolutely no doubt it will become more popular, but we equally need to become more familiar, more confident with negotiations. Okay. One more question if you have one. Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Any questions from you, Kenneth? You have the chair.
Yes, maybe I have a question for you. Most often, I think it's unavoidable we come across a discrepancy or inconsistency in scope. So, and quite often when we draft the scope, we will add, or I come across a clause which states whenever if there's a consistency in scope or discrepancy, someone will be referred, say the engineer. The engineer will be referred to make the interpretation on what should be followed. So how would you look at such kind of treatment on dealing with such kind of inconsistency?
Well, I think that's unfair on that one person who has to decide the time, cost, quality implications of that inconsistency. What I would in the ECC, notify an ambiguity or inconsistency under clause 17.1, notify an early warning under clause 15.1, call an early warning meeting, stick intelligent people together and decide, find out where the contractor is. They might have ordered one particular product and not the other, and cancelling that order and ordering another one might cost a lot of time and money. Find out what they've done, find out where they're going, and think about what the client needs, come up with a sensible compromise. But basically, if the inconsistency has been caused by the client in the client's scope, the contractor is deemed to have priced on whichever of the two things being inconsistent is in their favour.
Yeah, okay, that's my question. Usually, the contractor will look at the the case with the lowest cost. But on the other hand, the engineer, who if he's given the decision-making authority, will may choose the
that's not what the NEC. That's not what NEC says. NEC says choose whichever you want, but the contractor is deemed to have priced and programmed on the cheaper one.
Okay,
that's what and that actually is in general law. That law is called, let me type it out, contra preferentum. There's homework for people.
So if it's related to the regulation, so sometimes in terms of the regulation that a contractor need to follow, so there may be a duplicate or an overlap in regulation that a contractor need to follow, but unfortunately there are discrepancies or there are inconsistencies. So the contractor will follow
then that's tricky.
So how should NEC be dealing with such kind of situation?
Well, in all cases, it's for the project manager to decide what they want. It's for you to change the scope to decide what you want. And what the contract says is the contractor is deemed to have priced and programmed on whichever is in their favour. Where the theory of that doesn't quite work, I'd have to think about it, is what if the inconsistency involves something legally required, like applicable law? In law, you have to do something, but in the scope, they've specified something which is below the levels of the law. I'm not too sure what the answer would be there. If you've asked a contractor to give you something which is illegal, then I'm not sure how you would interpret the contract and say that you're deemed to have priced and programmed on something which is illegal. Doesn't sound right, does it? So you probably would argue that, look, the minimum must be compliance with the applicable law. That's the minimum, and you can't
Okay.
go below that. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So I've got, there's no more questions here, but I've got two or three more slides. I'll leave it for you to wrap up, Kenneth, if that's okay, and let people get off home safely in a lesser typhoon. So I think we've maybe created an idea for 2022. If you guys, if you want some more of these sessions, we can have more of these sessions. Speak to Bernice and Kenneth. That's no problem. One day we'll have we'll get back to the classroom. You might prefer your classroom side, but you might prefer webinars. I do. More of us can attend, but it's up to you. But in the meantime, join the NEC community. We've got on LinkedIn. Join LinkedIn with me. Connect with me. Connect with Letty. Come and debate things with us. Have a look at LinkedIn, type in my name and connect. That's one on the left. If you're not accredited, get accredited. Take the contract serious. Take the knowledge, you know, the contract management as seriously as you can. Get accredited, learn the contract, apply the contract, speak to Letty. We've passed this information on to Kenneth and Bernice, but there's a free membership of the NEC user group. We changed the NEC users group now. So if you are, or you know of a professional body other than ACEHK or a government department, there's a free membership of the users group. And look at those benefits. They're fantastic. One on the top one, presentation by senior NEC advisor. Guess what? That would be me on the introduction to NEC4 contracts, NEC4 e-learning, hard copy of an NEC4 ECC bundle, and so on. So any other professional bodies, pass this information on. And Kenneth, we still await your application of this. It's free. There are no catches. Go and grab it.
Okay.
And my last slide, for you guys who have attended today, we also now have individual NEC users group membership. Type in that code IUG50 and they will give you 50% off a 1-year individual membership, which I think is about just over $1,000, something like that. To show exactly how much it is, but again, have a look at the benefits. There's probably $2,000 or $3,000 worth of benefits there. So that's a unique offer to the ACE members for the next few webinars that we're running. And that, Kenneth, my friend, is it. I'll leave it for you to close.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob. It's a great time that you share with us on the scope, and I'm sure our members can receive a lot of such good messages from you. So when we are dealing with NEC, we may have a more insight on this topic. And for this series of webinar, we will have 2 more to go. So if members you are interested, please remember to register. And the next one will be in November, and the last one will be in December.
Yeah. One in November. Let's just put the December one. I think there's one before that one, Letty, that you've got. Can't find it. Should find this.
Yeah.
Oh, there. 15th of November. Early warning.
There's a one in 15th of November for early warning, and the last one in December the 5th. So maybe I think all members, if you are interested, so don't forget to enroll and register. So
and give us some feedback.
Yes. So more or less, I think we finished the section this evening, and we close the section now. Thank you. Have a good evening.
And a safe evening. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your questions. See you again. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.